on SpaceDogRadio.
Hey, this is Hadara on SpaceDogRadio, and I'm really excited to be here.
This is Bannon on SpaceDogRadio. Yes.
From someplace over the beautiful Pacific Northwest, USA, this is the Space Dog Radio Show. I'm the Space Dog. Thanks for tuning in. Space Dog Radio, your remote location radio station, coming to you 24/7. Today, we've got a special news contributor to Space Dog Radio, Mark Taylor-Canfield. He's an independent journalist, activist, and musician who has contributed to the Huffington Post, Daily Kos, and has been on various progressive radio shows. Mark, thanks for joining us again on Space Dog Radio.
Hey, shout out to all the space dogs around the planet listening to us tonight.
All right. Mark, what do you have for us for news from under the radar?
Well, Seattle has received a lot of attention from national and international media lately because of the Washington state elections. There were several issues that were drawing a lot of attention. One of them was the statewide initiative 522 to label genetically modified organisms in food, which led to a whole story of the Grocery Manufacturers Association getting in trouble with the State Attorney General's office for lack of disclosure on $7 million to that campaign. But let's just say that the corporations like Monsanto, DuPont, Dow Chemical got together and flooded the state with millions of dollars, just like they had done in California once before. And as we speak, that initiative is still losing. It's been very, very close, but it is. It looks like the genetically engineered food labeling initiative 522 is going down. Right now, the yes votes are at 48.9%, according to the Secretary of State's website, and the no votes are at 51.1%. So it's very close, within 500 votes. The other issue that drew a lot of attention was the proposition in SeaTac, Washington, which is just south of Seattle, which is a community, sort of a suburb, but, you know, it's where SeaTac International Airport is. Well, they decided to run a proposition, number one, which would raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And as we speak, that initiative is actually barely ahead by, 100 votes or so. So what's happening in Washington State is there's a mail-in balloting system, so it's taking, several weeks, actually, for the votes to be counted, which is something that's been very confusing to the national and international media. But the vote counts have been changing, and the positions in some of these local elections have been changing over the last week. So those are the two of the main stories that have drawn a lot of attention. I could mention, too, also that the City of Seattle Proposition number 1, which would create public financing for the city elections, is surprisingly losing at this point, although it was ahead at one point. So the no votes are barely beating out less than a percentage point the yes votes on that one. So that's a surprise. But the big story, which everyone seems to be talking about, is the new socialist member of the Seattle City Council. Her name is Kshama Sawant, and she's a native of India. She actually got a bachelor's degree in Mumbai, University of Mumbai, and then moved to the United States and got her PhD at North Carolina State University. She's a teacher at Seattle Central Community College and a member of the Socialist Alternative Party. She actually ran for the Washington State House of Representatives in the 43rd District and lost that race. But in a surprise to all of the political consultants around the country, the Socialist candidate actually beat incumbent Richard Conlon, who has been in that seat on the City Council for at least a decade. So it's a shocking news story, and it's proven once again that despite the Citizens United decision and the big money interests that tend to control the elections in the United States. Occasionally, a grassroots candidate who accepts donations from non-corporate sponsors can actually win. So she gave her victory declaration a couple of days ago at the SEIU union office in downtown Seattle and thanked the Occupy movement, because a lot of her supporters are members of the Occupy Wall Street movement and folks who had worked with Occupy Seattle, which, by the way, had an encampment at Seattle Central Community College where Kshama Sawant taught. So she was instrumental with the teachers union in giving them a place to basically get away from law enforcement harassment when they were downtown at Westlake Center for months. But, you know, she is the sort of superstar of Seattle right now. The Union Hall was packed with people, and one of the interesting aspects of the story, which I talked about on the Thom Hartmann Show and other places, is that a lot of her supporters are not socialists. In fact, the majority of her supporters don't seem to be socialists. I looked around the hall, and I saw people from the Sierra Club and the King County Labor Council and all sorts of more mainstream sorts of groups. So what's surprising about this is not only that she won, because she was actually behind until about a week ago, but that the people supporting her are not necessarily members of the Socialist Alternative Party and don't seem, at least in the Seattle area, don't seem to care too much about what her political affiliation is, because she's been standing up for the working class and saying that Seattle needs a $15 an hour minimum wage. So that's one of the stories that people all over the world and the country have been watching in Seattle. But it's amazing, because this is a very corporate town with Starbucks, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing, sort of, you know, really, really having a lot of influence over city politics. This is a shocking story. So folks around the country who get paid to be consultants are really nervous and confused right now.
Mark, what do you? There's a correlation here. There's a correlation between a socialist coming on to the city council of Seattle and a great senator, Bernie Sanders, who used to be a socialist. Now he declares he's an independent, but it doesn't really matter, because it's a very powerful and influential politician in the United States of America. Do you see the Bernie Sanders spread of inspiration across the nation? And when you interviewed her, did you get that sense from her, like she had the same type of energy as far as power to the workers and more taxing of the rich and providing to the poor?
Well, I can give you a couple of really good quotes. She told me, as far as when it comes to things like the living wage and rent control, because Seattle is becoming a very expensive city to live in. It used to be quite cheap, and now these days it's more like San Francisco, where downtown areas are being gentrified and middle-class working poor and immigrants are being pushed out. A lot of families actually are being made homeless. So she said that to those folks who think, in the corporate world, who think that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is a mistake, she said, well, if you don't want to give us a living wage, then please tell our landlords to lower our rents so we can actually afford to live and work in Seattle. So she's approaching this from a very practical working class point of view, and she actually said that her election, she said, you know, this night belongs to the working class all over the world, because that's who she feels like her allegiance is to. And she also said that she said she was advised to drop the socialist label and to run as a, quote, typical candidate. But she said in my interview with her, I think I've been successful because I'm authentic. I stood up for what I believe in, and that's what the voters want. So that relates directly to Bernie Sanders. Senator Bernie Sanders in the U.S. Congress did run as a socialist for his first few elections. He was elected to mayor of Burlington, Vermont as a socialist. And one of his major platform issues was that housing is a civil and human right. So the reason I know about that is because we had a city council member at one time named Judy Nicastro who ran on the issue of rent control. She wasn't actually successful, unfortunately, but during one of her public hearings, she had Bernie Sanders there to speak, and it was a very, very interesting talk. He ran as a socialist, and when I say socialist here, Thom Hartmann brought this issue up. What I'm referring to, from what I can tell, is more of a Northern European-style socialist, democratic kind of candidate. So far, I haven't heard any, Stalinist sort of Marxist speeches, although she's very cynical about capitalism. She's obviously working within the political system as a candidate in the traditional sense, in order to gain votes. She's used all of the basic grassroots electoral political techniques like signs all over town, and just a grassroots approach to approaching every voter individually, trying to convince them that the status quo is not working in Seattle. And one of the interesting things I thought was when she gave her speech, she told the media there, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you a quick soundbite because I'm going to make a quite lengthy speech here. But she quoted Professor Noam Chomsky. She said, if you're going to fight the status quo, you can't speak in soundbite. And I think people respect that about her, that, regardless of her political background, she is trying to speak the truth to power, and people in Seattle are open to that. A lot of the folks in the Occupy movement sort of divested from the political system, feeling that they were disenfranchised. Her candidacy and candidates like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have brought together people who don't trust the political system, hoping that they found candidates that will actually represent the middle class and the working class at a time when Wall Street seems to be running the country. So I would say, Bernie Sanders talk about running for U.S. president, and let's say the fight has been run up the poll in terms of a possible running mate named Elizabeth Warren, who I would consider actually another Occupy Wall Street sort of candidate. I think they're both very impressive to people across the country who feel like the Democrats and the Republicans have just sold them out to the corporations. Somebody needs to speak for the working class.
Right, I totally agree, Mark. That's awesome. I totally agree with you. Now, very impressive. Now, she's on city council. Bernie Sanders moved up into mayor as a socialist. Now he's an independent. And so Bernie Sanders, Jennifer Warren, very exciting stuff going on for 2016. You had an opportunity to talk to the brand new mayor of Seattle. What was that like?
Well, he was having a show, a party, victory celebration at Neumos in Seattle, which is a famous rock club. And
Neumos rocks. Yeah, it's good place.
Yeah. So, they were having a good time. They were partying, and the DJ was playing. It was really loud. But he was very gracious. I mean, he stepped off the stage away from his fellow supporters who were trying to congratulate him, and I apologized, but he said, no, that's why I'm here. I need to speak to the media. So I was actually covering that for Truth Out and Daily Kos. So he stepped into the hall with me, and I asked him, okay, Seattle has a new face. Is that important? I mean, and why is that important to the voters in Seattle? And what he told me was that the idea of having a new face as mayor was not really the issue. The real issue in his mind was consistent management of government. And that sounds very, wonky, but what it means is that McGinn gave an impression to a lot of his supporters that he was kind of slippery on certain issues like reform of the police department, which is something Kshama Sawant, by the way, is very strong on. I saw her give a really strong interview to the corporate media on that issue. But and also the support for the music clubs and the music industry in general in Seattle. A lot of those folks who think those issues are of the number one priority have moved over to Ed Murray because he represents someone who, may have a better chance. So I think that's what he was referring to. That's my interpretation of this idea that there needs to be consistency in Seattle government. And I think it comes from the fact that McGinn was really good on green issues and usually on really good neighborhood sort of civil rights issues until it came to, one, the Occupy movement, because obviously when the police arrested everyone at Westlake Center. The mayor had to approve that. And two, his stance of supporting the police chief, John Diaz, at a time when the Justice Department had just finished an 8-month review finding that the Seattle Police Department had a practice and policy of using excessive force. John Diaz actually ended up retiring, but in the meantime, McGinn was seen by the civil rights community as someone who was dragging his feet on that issue, and which leads to something that people should keep an eye out for, because the Seattle Times cover story, front page story within the last few days, was that once again the United States Department of Justice is accusing the Seattle Police Department of dragging their feet on these issues in terms of civil rights. So, Ed Murray is the new face, and people are hoping that both, because he was such a leader in the state legislature, they're hoping that his statewide connections can also help Seattle in some ways. But it remains to be seen. I'm a journalist, so my job is to be skeptical, and I'm going to reserve judgment, until I find out what he actually is going to do. There's a huge issue of overdevelopment in Seattle, and Paul Allen and other folks have, billions of dollars being invested into my own neighborhood. By the way, I wake up to pile drivers every morning at 7:30 a.m. But,
nice.
That issue of Nichols, our former mayor, having been in the pockets of the developers, and then McGinn sort of, siding with the police department on these issues. We'll see how Ed Murray goes. One of the issues is that McGinn and Nichols really did not get along with the Seattle City Council, because it's sort of an adversarial relationship in Seattle. The mayor is not a member of the council like is in some cities.
But that may change, though, right? With
Ed Murray will bring them together and bring more consensus.
That may change very drastically, I think, especially considering with a socialist on the city council. Mark, anything else humans should be watching for in terms of news from under the radar?
There is a story that the Stranger magazine in Seattle, which is an alternative press and was very instrumental, by the way, in bringing Kshama Sawant to the city council. She thanked them for supporting her candidacy, but they have a cover story this week about a surveillance network that supposedly the Seattle Police Department has created in downtown Seattle, which apparently can track people's cell phone GPS signals from their cell phones. And as far as I can tell, and I haven't looked into the story too much yet, the police department has been pretty closed-mouthed about what this system is used for. It might be questionable in terms of civil rights sorts of issues. So we're waiting to find out what the real purpose of the surveillance network is downtown. But these are electronic devices that are up on a lot of the light poles. And the Stranger is looking into it, so I would say, check thestranger.com for further developments on that news story.
Well, they didn't want drones in Seattle, but they sure have other surveillance all across the cities across the United States. Don't you think?
It seems like Seattle is a very interesting place because there's a lot of talk about civil rights and green technology and all of these cutting edge issues at the same time that there's also sort of a model for corporate culture in a lot of ways and surveillance culture. So we'll see. The people in Seattle better stay on guard and make sure that they vote.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of proposals coming up that could really make things better for people if they pay attention. People need civics lessons. I think a lot of folks have sort of forgotten that they're a part of the government. That this is a government of the people for the people, and they need to kind of stand up for themselves for once.
Perfectly put. Mark Taylor-Canfield, you can find him on Facebook.com, Mark Taylor-Canfield, and on Twitter, of course. You can find him on SpaceDogRadio.com. We'll put a link to all your sites. Mark, do you have any other shouts out you want to send to the planet?
Just to support alternative media. There's a lot of great folks out there, and I could mention a few. Jeff Santos out of Boston is doing some really nice stuff, and he's been covering these issues. Thom Hartmann, Norman Goldman, Mike Malloy. You can put them in a search engine and find their live streams and check out their shows. They're very much a part of this new sort of alternative media. Nicole Sandler is another person that Radio or Not, Filter Free Radio in Portland. I would just say, and Space Dog Radio, I think folks really need to support the alternative media, the independent media in the United States. We're still 32nd as far as Reporters Without Borders is concerned on the World Press Freedom Index. So we need to do better, and programs like this will help. So support your local independent media journalist.
Well put, Mark. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure talking to you. Always a pleasure to hear news from under the radar. Mark Taylor-Canfield, thanks again. We will catch you next orbit.
Hey, everybody. Have a good time. I'm orbiting now, and it's looking good. We'll see you soon.
From someplace over the Pacific Northwest, this has been the Space Dog Radio Show. Thank you for listening. Be safe, be happy, and I'll catch you next orbit.